And welcome to NewsNation, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, filling in for Chris, and we have this major breaking news that we were talking about tonight, a tragedy on the day before Thanksgiving. Two National Guardsmen in D.C., just blocks from the White House, were shot today, both in the head. They're currently in critical condition. Now, the suspect, who's in custody, has been identified as an Afghan national, and reports say he is a 29-year-old named Rahmanullah Lakanwal. I want to bring in NewsNation Washington correspondent Kellie Meyer live on the scene. Kellie, first of all, I understand you were right there. I mentioned it before. I'm so happy you're okay.
Yeah.
What are you seeing right now? What are you hearing? Again, very fluid, rapidly developing situation.
Yeah, we are getting new details into the newsroom tonight. We're learning more about the suspect tonight in this. As you just mentioned, we are learning from U.S. officials that they are investigating the shooting of two members of the National Guard right here in D.C., right here behind me, as a possible act of terrorism. We also know, U.S. officials confirming to NewsNation, that the shooter is an Afghan national. So these are two updates we are just getting in about the suspect. We know those two National Guardsmen still in critical condition tonight. As I mentioned, this happened about a block behind me. And as you said, around that time today, I was just walking out of the White House to grab lunch on what was otherwise a quiet day, the day before Thanksgiving. And then just moments later, there was police tape up. There were cars speeding by, both police cars from D.C. as well as Secret Service vehicles speeding by. I had asked a Secret Service agent what was going on. He said, "You'll hear soon enough." I said, "Are we safe?" He said, "Yes, you're safe, but just stay where you are." Everybody that was in that position, everybody stopped in their tracks. No more pedestrians were allowed to walk by, and no more cars were allowed through. And it stayed that way for quite a while as I was calling in to NewsNation over the phone until we were able to get up on air. So it's been an active scene all day here, Jesse, and you can still see the lights behind me. This is something that we're still learning more and more about as the hours go by, and I'm sure we will learn more as we head into tomorrow. But we know the reaction coming from Washington, from the president, from the vice president, from the Secretary of War. We do know that the president is ordering an additional 500 troops to be mobilized here in D.C. following this shooting. So a lot of reaction pouring in tonight as we continue to look for updates and any developments we hear of. Jesse.
Yep. Again, what was supposed to be a quiet day. Kellie, I'm glad you're okay. Thank you so much for the great reporting. And it should be noted, yes, these two National Guard members are in critical condition. There's been back and forth information, critical condition. Our thoughts, our prayers, our well wishes are with them. I want to continue talking about this. So for more on the investigation, let me bring in former acting U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf and former CIA officer and FBI Special Agent Tracy Walder. Thank you so much for both of you for coming on. I wish the circumstances were better. Tracy, I'll start with you. Potential suspect, Rahmanullah Lakanwal, 29 years old, Afghan national. There is reporting that he was in this country illegally on an expired visa through Operation Allies Welcome. We're still trying to get official confirmation on that. But if this is true, and we're talking about an Afghan national here, first thing I have to ask, Tracy, is the FBI now looking to see if there's some sort of connection to al-Qaeda or a terrorist network?
Well, thank you for having me, Jesse. Yes, they have to. I mean, that would be issue number one, right, is to determine motive, obviously, after they've secured the crime scene and made sure that there's no more threat to the public. That would be the first thing that they're trying to do. I think what's also most important is if this is connected to terrorism, whether it's al-Qaeda, ISIS in some way, shape, or form, are there other individuals attempting attacks like this? Is he in contact with other individuals? How was it missed that he overstayed his visa? Those are all questions that are going to be important, but I think motive first is what's going to be very important for the FBI to determine. And if they determine that it is terrorism, they're going to have to really look through his socials. Who are his connections? Who is he talking to primarily here in the United States to make sure that there are no other threats?
And I'm glad you mentioned what might be happening behind the scenes if the reporting is true and he's not cooperating, which maybe is not surprising. Chad, I want to go to you. Obviously, this is a targeted attack, right? I mean, you're talking the time, the place, the eve of Thanksgiving, not coincidental, it doesn't seem. But when we're talking about this and we're trying to say, do we classify this as terrorism, based on what the reporting indicates right now, what is your take on whether or not this is an act of terrorism?
Well, it certainly feels that way. I don't know that we can affirmatively say that now until the investigation continues to unfold and we get to his motive in trying to understand that. But let me just go back to how this individual came into the country. Came in 2021 under Operation Welcome Allies, as you indicated. We know that they brought in almost about 100,000 individuals under that program, Afghan nationals. Many of them were not properly vetted. We have Inspector General reports. We have an individual last year that was arrested planning an election day terror plot that was an Afghan national part of this program. So I think there needs to be a broader look at all the individuals that came in under that program. Those humanitarian visas have now expired. They're here illegally. They have overstayed a visa. And you now have ICE and other law enforcement looking for these types of individuals while at the same time being targeted by individuals. It's not just obviously these National Guardsmen, but ICE and CBP officials are being targeted in cities across the country as well. So all of this starts to come together as you paint this picture of trying to dig out from what the Biden administration did in bringing individuals into this country that were not properly vetted.
See, Chad, you kind of laid it up for me because we are talking about the investigation right now, and as details are coming in, the politics of this, as this is now getting a bit clearer as to what may have happened and who the suspect is. In the next part of the show, I am going to focus on the politics of it. I have two congressmen coming on to talk about this because you know that it's going to be used by both sides. Tracy, I got to go back to you on this because, again, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. I was talking about with Hannah. Middle of the day, okay, handgun, approaching two armed National Guard members. This is an area of high visibility, crowded, right? I mean, what does that tell you, those aspects of this case? Because I think about it and I said, how is this possible? How did this happen?
Well, I just want to go back, if that's okay, actually to September of this year. The National Counterterrorism Threat Center actually issued a 5-page threat warning, essentially to law enforcement personnel by Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the United States. So that's actually, if this is terrorism, that would be interesting to note that correlation. In something like this, that's how I knew right away that this was unfortunately a targeted attack. This is, as you mentioned, a very busy area. Obviously, I've lived in Washington, D.C. It's full of tourists. And as Kellie mentioned prior, she was there simply to get lunch. This was right around lunchtime on the East Coast. Him walking up to these individuals tells me these were his targets. He was not looking at some kind of a large scale attack against, the population as a whole. That's what that told me immediately, especially because he aimed for the head instead of the center mass. He was trying to inflict the maximum amount of damage on these individuals, which is obviously incredibly unfortunate. Also, if this was done with a handgun, that is very easy to conceal. I suspect that that's what he had done until the moment that he walked up to these individuals.
You know, Chad, with the president now suggesting that they want to order 500 more troops to D.C., on one hand, you could say, understandable. Look at this act of violence. We're not going to be deterred. We need more of these armed forces on the ground here. I think it, maybe demonstrates the level of violence in D.C. The other hand is they would say, you're putting more men and women from the National Guard at risk, in harm's way. What's your take on the effect of having potentially 500 more National Guard members on the ground in D.C.?
Yeah, what I would say is it's really important that we don't let an incident like this, back us down and get to your second point to say, well, we're going to put more people in harm's way, so we don't want to do that. We let the terrorists, we let the bad guys win when we do that. I think surging additional personnel is the right move, right? As the investigation unfolds, you don't know if there are more planned attacks for tomorrow, over the long holiday weekend, and elsewhere. So until they get more information and they can rule that out, I think surging more individuals, more personnel into D.C. is probably the right move at this time.
And by the way, kudos to the National Guard and local law enforcement, Tracy, for neutralizing this threat so quickly, because you have to wonder what this could have escalated to. I want to go back to something that you mentioned, though. Are you going to be on the lookout for any kind of threat assessment against the National Guard, whether there was some chatter and whether or not it was properly monitored, whether or not it was followed up on? Because I'll tell you, many times I've had this conversation here on NewsNation, people have said it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. And I would say, God forbid, I hope you're 100% wrong. But are you saying that there could be internal threat assessments that the National Guard had or local law enforcement had about them being on the streets?
That's That's a hard question to answer, Jesse. I'm not trying to skirt it in any way, shape, or form. But as someone that sat in the Counterterrorism Center on September 11th, I want folks to understand what these threats and threat assessments look like. All we knew going into 9/11 is that terrorists were looking at popular targets and were maybe hijacking airplanes. What are we supposed to do about that? There's not much that we can do. I suspect there were probably warnings of heightened security, as I mentioned in September, to law enforcement. But what does that mean? Who is that against? And how are these attacks going to be perpetrated? That's the hard part. And it makes it really, really difficult to prepare for that. So I don't think they were necessarily missed. I think it's just impossible to understand the level of heinous creativity that these individuals have and to prepare against that.
Yeah, and again, you could have just, the allegations are true, a lone gunman, maybe we'll get an explanation, maybe we won't. DHS, Chad, the role of DHS now in an investigation like this, both here in D.C. and maybe across cities across the country where the National Guard may be deployed. What's the role of DHS right now?
Well, they're primarily going to be looking at the immigration status of this individual to understand exactly how he came into the country, if he was vetted, was it done properly, was it done or not? When did he fall out of status of that humanitarian visa that he received? Did anyone check on him? Like, they're going to go through a variety of different processes there at the department to understand who this individual is there, and they'll turn that over, obviously, either to local, to FBI, and to others that are leading the investigation.
You know, Tracy, I said this before, maybe it's not surprising that reportedly this guy is not cooperating. And part of me is like, okay, you know, maybe why would he reveal any information? Maybe if he's a part of some sort of network or has collaborators or accomplices of some kind. Just putting that aside, speculating. The other way of looking at it is, if this was to send a message, National Guard, D.C., President Trump was the one who had, authored National Guard troops being in D.C., the eve of Thanksgiving. If there was a message that this person wanted to send, wouldn't he vocalize it to law enforcement? Or am I not thinking about it the right way? What should we take from the fact whether or not this person may not be cooperating?
If you want me to be completely blunt with you, Jesse, and I will, I'm surprised that he actually did not unalive himself. That is typically what individuals like this do. Obviously, he was injured in this. Maybe he had prepared for that. So I think part of it is not necessarily that deep. I think some of it is putting the American people on edge, right? So picking this location in Washington, D.C., at the seat of our power, taking out members of the military tends to put people on edge, whether that's real or not, and it instills fear. And that, in my opinion, is the whole point of what they are doing.
And Chad, where are we right now in the state of foreign or domestic threats, terrorism threats? Where are we in this country in terms of intercepting those communications, intercepting those threats, being on the lookout for them? It's not every day you see something like this, but this is kind of unique circumstances. What should we be thinking?
Well, we've gotten a lot better since 9/11, but, there's a lot more effort that needs to go on. We're not going to catch everything, unfortunately. Bad things do happen here in the United States. But let me just say this. Right now, I do believe that there is a war against law enforcement, whether it's CBP, ICE, and now National Guardsmen who are exercising law enforcement powers. And we've seen this from a variety of different ways, and we see this from folks on the left and others talking about how National Guardsmen in U.S. cities, not just D.C., but in other U.S. cities, are an occupying force, right? And calling them all sorts of different names. And I think the rhetoric here, which I'm sure you'll get into later in your segment, is a driving factor here that is really, really disturbing. I think overall, and I'll end on this, the threat environment, anytime you're in the holiday season, right, from Thanksgiving to Christmas to New Year's, July 4th, big holidays, the threat environment is at a heightened awareness. And all law enforcement understands that. They know that. The folks in our federal government who are monitoring these types of threats know that as well. So that obviously played a factor here as well.
Yeah, even though we still don't know the exact motive, the circumstances behind this, the temperature definitely needs to come down right now. Chad Wolf, Tracy Walder, thank you so much for coming on this Thanksgiving Eve. I'm wishing you and your families a healthy and a happy Thanksgiving. Again, I wish I saw you under better circumstances, but always appreciate your expertise. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next, so we've talked about how this tragic act of violence happened. Next, I want to talk about the why. Why did it happen? And I'm going to do that with members of Congress from both sides of the aisle who have very different takes when it comes to the National Guard. I'm Jesse Weber in for Chris Cuomo. A Thanksgiving Eve tragedy today. We're covering how two National Guardsmen were shot in the head by a lone assailant just blocks from the White House. The suspect is reportedly a 29-year-old Afghan national named Ramanullah Lakanwal, who entered the United States in 2021. Both National Guardsmen are currently in critical condition, and the FBI is reportedly investigating this as an act of terror. President Trump took to Truth Social, calling the shooter an animal, vowing that he will pay a very steep price. And Trump also doubled down on his National Guard deployment effort, ordering an additional 500 guardsmen to D.C. For further discussion on the why, the politics of this, I want to bring in lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. We're joined by Republican Randy Fine and Democrat Suhas Subramanyam. Thank you so much for coming on, both of you. Representative Fine, I'll start with you. So you had a tweet after the shooting. My prayers go out to the two National Guardsmen who were shot, their families, and all who were impacted by this senseless act of violence. You have been somebody who has supported the National Guard deployment. The statement from September, you said public safety is a choice, and I want to thank President Trump for choosing to make Washington great again. I have to ask you, as this is developing, you know what a talking point's going to be. There are those who are going to say it was the president's fault, that if the president hadn't ordered National Guard members to D.C., this wouldn't have happened, that he put them in the line of fire. When you get that question, when you get that comment, what will be your response?
I'm going to call them the idiots that they are. The National Guard was brought to Washington to make it safer. It's been overwhelmingly successful. And the people of Washington, including the Democrat mayor, say so. And let me say this. What happened today was not a tragedy. A tragedy is when someone crashes their car by accident. This was a terrorist attack by an illegal immigrant, a Muslim terrorist from Afghanistan who walked out of a subway station, walked up to two National Guard soldiers and shot them in the head. We should be angry is how we should be feeling right now. And the only other emotion we should have is being brokenhearted for these two brave National Guardsmen and their families.
And Representative Subramanyam, the temperature's hot right now. National Guard is part of the conversation. The flip side of it is there are going to be those who say they have been demonized by those on the left, right? These armed men and women coming into cities. You had Democrat Senator Alyssa Slotkin appeared on Sunday, said that the National Guardsmen, she was nervous, would begin shooting at American citizens. Is it that kind of talk, that kind of language, that kind of rhetoric, where, as I mentioned before the break, I kept getting the question, Jesse, be on the lookout. Something like this is going to happen. Something like this is going to happen. And yes, we don't know the full motive. We don't know the full circumstances here. But is that a problem? Is that something that might have fueled something like this?
Well, to the extent that National Guardsmen themselves have been demonized, I don't think that's right. I think, certainly I and many others have opposed the deployment and the way they deployed the National Guard, but the National Guardsmen themselves we fully support, and this is absolutely horrific what happened. And so, certainly this is not what we want to see, especially Thanksgiving week like this. And we don't know exactly the motives, so we don't know if it's terrorism for sure, but what we do know is that this is preventable, should be preventable, and we should make sure that this never happens again.
100%. And Representative Fine, I'm going to go back to this idea of now deploying 500 more National Guard members, putting aside the legal logistics of it. Yes, I'm the attorney, and I could talk about how recently a judge said that the president's deploying a National Guard in D.C. is illegal and it should be suspended. Put that to the side. From a political point of view, from a safety point of view, is it the right move to deploy this many members of the National Guard, considering what just happened? Or do you agree with Pete Hegseth when he said we will not be deterred and this is not, we shouldn't remove forces from our cities?
Absolutely, I support it. And I think we need to go a step further. It is unacceptable when someone who should not be in our country at all hurts an American. And so what we need to do is double down, triple down, quintuple down on the number of ICE agents rounding up and deporting every single one of these people who is in our country illegally. That's what people should be most angry about. This is someone who shouldn't have even been here, who is trying to execute American servicemen. People should be angry. We need a lot more law enforcement, not less.
And that's an interesting point. So, Representative Subramanyam, there's an issue here where if this is true, right, you have somebody who came in here, was supposed to be welcomed as an Afghan refugee, overstayed visa, now allegedly targeted 2 members of our National Guard. How is this not going to be a talking point for President Trump, for his administration, for those on the right to say, this is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about illegal immigration, when we talk about illegal migration and the dangers here? What would be your response to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, I'll just say that, it can be a talking point, but the reality is we have a broken immigration system. We've had for a while now. We've needed to solve this for many decades, and we haven't as a country. We've tried many times and failed. And so Congress needs to come together and do comprehensive immigration reform, not just this piecemeal thing and, sending people at border. I mean, this was a visa overstay. I've said this so many times. A lot of the undocumented folks in our country are not people coming across the border. They're actually visa overstays. And so we need to have a better process there and do better enforcement there. But I don't think doubling and tripling down on the National Guard is the right solution either. I mean, DC law enforcement is underfunded. Budgets earlier this year that Congress passed underfunded DC law enforcement. They're 800 officers short. We should be putting more officers on the ground who have experience with this and knowledge about how to do community policing rather than just National Guardsmen who don't have the same kind of experience in a situation like that.
That's an interesting point, Representative Fine. The argument would be they're untrained in federal law enforcement procedures. They're on the ground there. There's an uncertainty about what their position should be. Maybe they're, going back to the idea of are they being put in harm's way? Should it be an increase in funding in local law enforcement? I mean, when you look at something like this, is that a fair assessment that perhaps they don't belong on the ground there?
I think saying it would be okay if 2 DC cops got shot in the head by an illegal immigrant Muslim terrorists from Afghanistan, as opposed to 2 National Guards, is a pretty disgusting equivocation. My view is this: we need to be rounding up all of these people and sending them home. My colleague is correct. Half of illegal immigrants in this country did not swim across the Rio Grande. They came here legally, and then they refused to go home when they were supposed to. They are just as illegal as those who swam across the Rio Grande, and all of them need to be rounded up, and all of them need to be deported. And I hope what we take from this is a determination to do that, because when an American citizen is killed by someone who should not have even been in the country at all, it is a disgrace.
And there's multiple stories that pop up. Please. Yeah.
I did not say that it was okay for cops to get shot either. That's absolutely false, and I'd never say that. I think what I was saying is that cops are experienced in doing community policing and evidence-based law enforcement, not National Guardsmen, who, frankly, many of them have said they didn't know what to do when they got there, right?
Yeah. I think the guy walked out of the station, held up his gun, and shot them in the head. I don't know that it would have mattered if they were DC police or not. I mean, this was
Representative Five.
Representative
Five, just 1 second. Representative Subramanyam. Yeah.
I think this was a terrible act. We don't know if it's terrorism yet, but it's certainly awful. So we don't know the motives behind this. But I'll say generally, and because I live in the D.C. area, I'm 30 minutes outside in Northern Virginia, we have seen people who work there go in and out who say that this has been a real waste of taxpayer money and a waste of resources when we should be diverting those resources to policing because the D.C. police have been underfunded. That would have been a better approach this whole year.
Unfortunately, this is one of those situations that is going to be politicized. It is going to be a talking point, and it's going to be used in different ways. So I think it's really, really important to get to the bottom of what exactly happened here in the circumstances, and that's hopefully what we can do. But Congressman, thank you both for coming on. Again, wish it was under better circumstances. Wishing you all healthy and a happy Thanksgiving to you and your families. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, last night, I hope you watched this. So Chris and NewsNation, they aired what I will say is one of the most important documentaries that I've ever seen. It's called Killing Cancer. Cancer affects everybody, okay? It documents one doctor's desperate fight to get his cancer drug, which he claims could save the lives of tens of thousands of people, approved by the FDA. So why is his drug, is it really the miracle that we've all been looking for? That's number one. And if so, why is it so hard to get it to the masses? That story, next. Were you watching NewsNation last night? If not, you should have. Why? Because last night, NewsNation's documentary, hosted by Chris, called Killing Cancer, it has received an overwhelming response in just the past 24 hours. It documents Dr. Patrick Sushang's battle to get what he believes to be his life-saving cancer drug to the entire population. The drug is called Anktiva, and it's only been FDA approved to treat a specific kind of bladder cancer, but it has been working for all kinds of cancers. Take a look.
You have in your body, God-given, a cell that kills cancer. There's a cell called the natural killer cell that is your body's first responder. We just haven't figured that out. The only thing that you need to protect in your body is your natural killer cell. And if you protect that, that's what actually not only prevents cancer, but treats cancer and maybe cures cancer.
Building on these ideas, Sushang came up with Anktiva, an immunotherapy drug he claims has the potential to target all forms of cancer.
The natural killer cell all have on their surface a receptor that's looking for a protein that your body makes called IL-15, interleukin-15. The most important molecule is IL-15. Anktiva is that IL-15.
In other words, when the natural killer cell is treated with IL-15, amazing things happen. The cell becomes stronger, more durable, and it multiplies faster, turning a normal soldier into the equivalent of the Incredible Hulk, powerful enough to take on those cancer cells and kill them. Take a look at this time-lapse video of a supercharged NK cell in action.
So the green is a regular breast cell.
Correct.
The red is a breast cancer cell.
Correct.
And the gray
is the natural killer cell. So the natural killer cell has the capacity to identify cancer cells, infected cells, abnormal cells, and selectively kill it.
Spend any time in Dr. Sushang's clinic and you'll see there's no shortage of patients willing to attest to similarly wondrous results.
I'm extremely healthy, probably too healthy for my age. All of this is because of this treatment.
This was my tumor to start with, and then with all the treatments, it's now almost gone.
So here's what you haven't been able to fix, which is the demand. And
10,000 desperate requests daily. If you look at this one, September 26th, doctor, please help me. It's very hard for us literally to play God. Our drug is approved, believe it or not, just for a tiny piece of a subset of bladder cancer.
That's right. As of today, Anktiva is not available for patients with every other type of cancer: breast, lung, brain, you name it. For that to happen, the FDA says it needs more trials, more data, more proof of safety and effectiveness, and more time.
Why is it that the clinicians or the FDA or whatever the standard is not impressed by this?
I think we stuck in the old assumptions. We stuck in the check the box, and we stuck in show me chemotherapy. They don't recognize that this is a ubiquitous treatment of your immune system. You shouldn't ask what cancer is that. That's what we're trying to get the FDA to understand.
That's the question, right? That's the question. This is amazing. So why has it been such a struggle to get the FDA to approve the drug? I want to bring in Dr. Stephen Finkelstein, who was featured, by the way, in the documentary. He's the National Director of Radiation Oncology with U.S. Urology Partners. And also we have with us former CDC Director, Dr. Robert Redfield. Thank you both so much for coming on. Dr. Finkelstein, I'll start with you. Just to be clear, you believe that this treatment, okay, this drug can cure cancer?
Well, we saw last night, Chris hugged patients who unfortunately had multiple therapies failed them, and was given this therapy. And Chris gave a hug, and Patrick gave a hug to people who were alive. It's really remarkable. You can see it. It would pass what my old mentor Steve Rosenberg would say is grandma's test, which is if your grandmother saw a gentleman who is near death and all of a sudden he was given a treatment and he just was on your TV show. It's pretty remarkable. First, I wanted to say that this is not my normal look. I wanted to give Chris props for this facial hair here is No Shave November. This is being on the show tonight is about cancer awareness. And the first piece is for those men out there, those men who Chris is raising awareness to and I'm raising awareness to, go get checked out for cancer so we don't get to these scenarios. That's the first thing. Yep. This is a message of true hope. This is a message my mentor, Steve Rosenberg, would say that every patient deserves a true, hopeful cancer doctor. And I think Patrick's trying to bring that today.
No, and I appreciate that. Have you ever administered this drug to any of your patients? Have you yourself seen the real-world effects of this?
So my group, I'm fortunate, my partner and I, Christopher Pizanka, gave the first dose of commercial Anktiva in the United States. And like I can say, I have a long history of IL-15, working with co-investigators Chris Klebanoff, Nick Restifo, and Steve Rosenberg. We gave IL-15 in vivo in animals at the NCI 20 years ago and published those results in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science when I was in government service, worked for the government. And I'll tell you, it took 25 years to get to this place. It's pretty remarkable.
That's the part that I want to get into. Dr. Redfield, I don't understand. It seems amazing. Why is this so tough to get the FDA to approve this?
You know, Jesse, I think one of the problems is people are locked into old paradigms. As you said, you know, it's check the box. Patrick Zune is clearly one of the most transformational, I think, researchers, entrepreneurs we have. He recognized, and I'm 100% excited about his work, he recognized that one of the ways we can approach cancer is actually teach the immune system to work more effectively. Right. And yet, historically, what our whole cancer therapy has been developed on is how to really destroy the immune system with chemotherapy and radiation therapy. Mm-hmm. So it's just we're locked into the old paradigm. I thought that when President Trump did the, Right to Try Act, that we'd get around that and that we could really have people have the right to try. The old school still believes the gold standard is a double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial. I don't agree with that. I agree with your colleague you have from on the call with us right now. I mean, if you see 10 people with cancer get better, that means something. And I think we need to move away from the idea of this double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial and allow these drugs with the right to try. Patients get them, do post-marketing studies to see how they do, and to move this forward. I really think Patrick's onto something. I think getting the natural killer cells to work more effectively with IL-15 can really make a huge impact on cancer for people who are trying today. Lucky for me, I had cancer diagnosed this year. And they tried to convince me to do chemotherapy and hormonal therapy and radiation therapy. And I happened to say, even though I'm older, can't you just take my prostate out? And they said, yeah, but you're kind of old. There's no increased survival. I said, no, take my prostate out. And they did. And so now I'm cancer free. Patrick's onto something, and they should accelerate their support of his efforts.
That's amazing. I'm so happy you're doing well. I will tell you what it emphasizes is people are looking for an alternative to traditional routes that kill the body. And the problem is with these clinical trials, with these studies, with these double-blind studies, like you say, the one thing these patients don't have is time. And they can't wait 5 years for there to be approval. So I'm hoping through this documentary, through this study, through more conversation with doctors like you, maybe there could be a change. Appreciate you both. Look, Killing Cancer is going to air again tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on NewsNation. I encourage everybody to check it out. Dr. Redfield, Dr. Finkelstein, thank you both so much for coming on and the work that you do.
Thanks, Jesse. And I just want to echo, everyone should watch this documentary. It's exceptional in what the potential is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you both.
Thank you guys so much for having us.
You got it. Appreciate it. All right. Up next, yesterday, President Trump said a deal between Russia and Ukraine was very close to happening. Now, Russia pushed back and saying, not so fast, Mr. President. A lot more is going to need to happen before any deal gets done. And by the way, while all of this is going on, what does President Putin do? He puts out a 2026 beefcake calendar. Got the shots to prove it, and we will show you next. So President Trump seemed hopeful yesterday that a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine was imminent. Problem is, Russia is calling that claim premature. They continue bombing Ukraine with a series of missile and drone strikes. And meanwhile, President Putin seems remarkably unfazed because as all this is going on, he just put out a 2026 beefcake calendar of himself. Now, we're going to show up. The question is, will he show up at a meeting in Moscow next week with U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff, possibly Jared Kushner, or is he planning the 2027 calendar? I want to bring in former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Bill Taylor and a former advisor to President Zelensky who has witnessed the devastation of this war in Ukraine firsthand, Dan Rice. And by the way, fun fact, both West Point grads, both worked together in Iraq and Ukraine, and now they're together. Great to have you both here. Dan, this pushback by Russia, does that mean that these peace deal talks are doomed? We shouldn't expect much from Steve Witkoff going there next week?
Jesse, I'm really excited that the President of the United States is so focused on finding peace in Ukraine. I think that's a tremendous step forward. We didn't have that for 3 years, basically. President Biden didn't push for peace talks. So the President of the United States, President Trump, is pushing for that. That's great. Right now, what we have is the United States and Ukraine coming together to come to an agreement on terms that make sense for those two parties. What we don't have is Russia coming aboard. I don't believe Putin wants peace. So what we're going to most likely see is Putin say no to peace, and then it's time to escalate and to provide Tomahawk missiles and other sanctions, which is probably the next step. That's just my prediction. But I'd love to hear Ambassador Taylor's opinion because he's got more experience than I do at that.
Guess what? I would love to hear it too. Ambassador Taylor, what are ways that the U.S. can, I guess, put pressure on Russia, right? You think there's a number of ways.
I do, Jesse, and I agree with Dan. I totally agree with Dan. That is, the reason you're hearing cold water coming out of Moscow is because they want to drag it out. They're not interested. And what we have to do is put pressure on Putin. And you're right, there are several ways to do that. One, and Dan mentioned this, we could provide the Ukrainians with these long-range Tomahawk missiles to enable them to go deep into Russia with their own missiles, but also with ours at military targets. That's the military side. In addition, we need to squeeze off the flow of funds, the revenue coming that the Russians use to fund this war, coming from sales of oil and gas. We've done some of that. President Trump has done some of that. Recently, in the past 3 weeks, they put sanctions on the two biggest oil companies in Russia. That's had an effect already of reducing these revenues. Those kind of, and then the third thing, Jesse, is to push the Europeans to provide $300 billion of frozen Russian assets to the Ukrainians. That will keep them going for 3 years.
So, Ambassador Taylor, do you have confidence in the Witkoff meeting next week? You think something's going to come from it?
If Witkoff goes there with this message from President Trump that he's going to get very tough, wants Putin to come to the table on, as Dan said, there's an agreement now between the Ukrainians and the Americans and the Europeans, by the way, on this 19-point plan. Witkoff has to push Putin with Trump's backing to come there. And if so, yeah, he could do that.
So, Dan, actually, when you think about Witkoff, it came out, Bloomberg reported it, that there was this call on October 14th where Witkoff allegedly advised Putin's top foreign policy aide, Yuri Yushakov, to what to say to Trump to agree to a deal. Now, the president has come forward and said, look, it's negotiating. He's negotiating, trying to make a deal happen. That was interesting, though, that kind of back channel. What'd you make of that, if it's true?
Well, there's so much misinformation, disinformation. It's hard to say what was actually said in these discussions. And I do appreciate the special envoy's position, Mr. Witkoff, and working with the Russians. Personally, I would never want that job. I think they're war criminals and they're disgusting people. But somebody has to do it. And I think
it kind of proves the 28-point deal, though, right? It did show that.
You know, there was certainly fingerprints of the Russians on that 28-point deal, but from what we're told, that the 19-point deal has removed a lot of that. But I do think that you know, the Ukrainian people, I would like to say on Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving, and I think the Ukrainian people, President Zelensky, are very thankful for American support, incredibly thankful. But we need more until victory. We always need more. And thank you, Jesse, for all that you're doing and Chris is doing to support Ukraine.
Yeah. So Ambassador Taylor, I can't end this conversation without throwing up the 2026 calendar. I would ask you, which is your favorite month? I'm a big fan of the piano playing. I think that's a nice touch. What's the idea of this? While, I don't know, Russia is engaged in a war with Ukraine and thousands of people are dying. Well, I'm not sure I quite understand this one.
So, Jesse, you've pointed out, this is a war criminal. This is an indicted war criminal. He steals Ukrainian children. He assassinates people. He has war crimes. And so we should pay no attention to Putin.
All right. Well, none of you are getting this calendar, I guess, for the holidays. It was an interesting development. I'll say that much. Ambassador Bill Taylor, Dan Rice, thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse.
Happy holidays.
Thank you both.
We'll be right back. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I want to wish everybody a healthy and a happy Thanksgiving. Really, it's been a great show. Chris is going to be back on Monday. You're like, Jesse Weber, I'm done. When's Chris coming back? Monday. But here's the good news. Batya Ungar-Sargon is filling in for Leland Vitter tonight. And Batya, good to see you. I know you're going to continue to follow what's happening in D.C. Just unbelievable that happened on Thanksgiving Eve.
It's so horrifying, and especially as we're all, I think, contemplating spending time with friends and family, to think about the families of the National Guardsmen who were shot today. It's just so utterly heartbreaking. And I wanted to ask you, how are you resolving that, the joy that we're going to be feeling with our families, thinking about this horrible thing that just happened?
You know, I don't know if you know this, I cover crime stories each and every day. Families that are affected each and every day. There is no easy answer. There is no closure. This is now the beginning of a reality and a journey. But what I will say is these two people who were gunned down, this is a new reality for their families. You're wishing this never happens again. The question now is getting answers and making sure nothing like this ever happens again. And look, the truth is, as I said it, yes, this will be politicized, but how do we come together? That's the question.
And you do such a good job of that, of covering crime with humanity.
I try, but now you're going to pick up the reins and cover it from here. And healthy and happy Thanksgiving.
Indeed, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks so much, Jesse.